NFL draft season is here. Let's get it. I have to say, my favorite part of NFL draft season isn't just making my own mock drafts, it's being able to criticize everything that Mel Kiper Jr. is about. I don't know if you guys have been watching my mock drafts from last year or my reviews of people's mock drafts last year, but Mel Kiper, I just blatantly disagree with. I think he has some pretty horrific takes. So I always like to take a peruse through some of his mock drafts, criticize it, and kind of give my thoughts. So here's Mel Kiper's official 3-round mock draft. I'm not going to do all 3 rounds. We're going to go and just yap about the first round a little bit. I'm going to give my thoughts, and we're going to go from there. Starting off number 1, me and him are kind of in agreement here. I think this is a no-brainer. Fernando Mendoza, quarterback out of Indiana. Everything they've been doing in the offseason kind of suggests that this is the move that they're going to do. I don't really think there's a conversation about any other quarterback, not only in the first round, but at this pick right here at the 1-1. So, yep. Arvell Reese, I think this is a swing on upside. I totally agree here. What does he say here? Opting for the upside to Reese over proven production in Texas Tech's David Bailey, double-digit sack potential in the NFL, and can be a versatile player for Coach Aaron Glenn. The one thing that I said, which if you haven't seen my mock draft, it's live up on the channel right now, so go ahead and check it out. I do have them picking Arvell Reese as well. However, I think they have a lot more hesitancy in making this pick, given how shaky he looked in the edge drills at his pro day. Maybe he's not as versatile right now coming into the draft as we think or may have previously thought that he is. So I think he's probably going to take the Micah Parsons trajectory, which isn't a bad projection for him, but I just don't think he's fully the edge rusher yet. He's pretty raw at that position. Number 3, Francis Mauigoa. I think this makes the most sense. They have a lot of needs. I could see them going with someone on the front 7 if there's a guy that they like more, but I think Mauigoa gives them a lot more and kind of helps them move forward with that franchise, especially bringing in an offensive mind like LaFleur. I like the pick. It's an unsexy pick, but it makes a lot of sense when you're building a franchise. Here we go. So at 4, he has the Tennessee Titans taking David Bailey, edge out of Texas Tech. They have been making a lot of moves. I just think while it is a defensive mind in Robert Saleh, now the head coach there, I think they are also recognizing the fact that they have a young quarterback on a rookie deal who dealt with arguably more pressure than 90% of the NFL last year, who they want to continue to develop and to improve. And I think the best way to do that is invest into getting him weapons and resources on that offense that can help take the burden off of him having to do everything. So that's where I think that this is where Jeremiah Love goes right here. I'm curious to see where Mel Kiper has him slotted in. But at the same time, like, getting David Bailey isn't a bad pick. He had production. I think that Akeem Mesidor playing alongside David Bailey made it easier for him, and I think that Theo Ash on TikTok did a really good breakdown on Bailey, which is why I'm a little bit lower on him. Number 5, this is an interesting one. He has Jeremiah Love going to the Giants in the 5th pick here. So this is pretty uncommon, but I guess it makes sense. I mean, Scadaboo had a pretty nasty injury last year, and then when he was out, your running production really wasn't there. So Jeremiah Love is absolutely a light years better athlete than what Cam Scadaboo gives you, and who knows what he looks like coming back after the injury now. So getting Jeremiah Love and how versatile a weapon he can be makes a lot of sense for that offense. However, I think Harbaugh's really trying to build something on the defensive side of the ball, and I think there's a lot of interesting offensive talent later in this draft that I could see the Giants prioritizing instead. So it makes sense. Jeremiah Love's nasty, but I'd be curious to see what the Giants do this year. Number 6, this is interesting. Makai Lemon at 6 to the Cleveland Browns. I just blatantly disagree with this. I don't think that Makai Lemon is going to go in the top 10. I actually don't have him going in the top 15. I think that GMs are going to remember his interviews from the Combine, which reports were coming out at that time that he just tanked those interviews. So for that reason, I think that teams are going to look more at Carnell Tate or Jordan Tyson when they're in the market for a wide receiver. And while I do think that the fit with the team makes a lot of sense as the big slot guy, which is something that the Cleveland Browns could really benefit from having, I think the other teams that are going to be at the top of the draft here that are going to be in the market for a wide receiver are probably more looking for boundary guys. And I think it'd be a little bit redundant to draft someone like Mekhi Lemon when you look at the skill set. So for that reason, I'm a little bit lower. I don't like this pick at all. I think that it would make more sense in this situation to trade down to a team that's looking to come up, draft a guy like Sonny Styles, or to go and get another edge rusher or one of these offensive tackles that are in this draft. So with a team like Cleveland, who has a lot of different needs that they need to address, stockpiling assets, going closer to the 10 range and still coming out of it with one of the top wide receivers in the draft, I just think makes more sense for them. But Mekhi Lemon is a good player. I think this is a reach at 6 for me. Number 7, Commanders going Caleb Downs. So it makes sense. The Commanders just need to get younger. And Caleb Downs can play in a variety of different positions in that Nicky Manwari, Kyle Hamilton type of role. So I'm not mad at the pick, but I think for them, if there's an opportunity to get an edge rusher like a David Bailey or even a Ruben Bain, who I haven't seen go in the draft yet, I would see them going for one of those players first, just because it's a more premier position. And especially given the fact that Caleb Downs has, his medicals came out that said that he has some sort of deteriorating thing in his knee, which is the exact same thing that came out about Will Johnson last year, who was seen as the premier cornerback one in his draft class and ended up falling all the way to the mid-second round to Arizona. So for that reason, I do think Caleb Downs is going to fall, not because he isn't a good player or a good talent, just the medicals and then the fact that he plays safety, I think is going to scare some teams. But I like the pick. And then Sonny Styles falling to 8 right here in the Saints. I think they're going to be sprinting this pick in. It's an amazing pick for them, and I think it's a no-brainer. I think they'd also consider going and getting Ruben Bain, who still is falling in this draft. I know there's the whole arm length thing with him, but he had top-tier production at Miami. And on top of that, he was just dominant when you watch the film. So for me, while the arm length thing isn't ideal, I think you have to value the tape and what you're seeing on the field. And what you see on the field with Ruben Bain is he dominates and he gets after the quarterback and has production. So he finds a way to make it happen. But Sonny Styles, it makes sense. He's versatile. He's athletic. He can do a lot of different things for this Saints team, which is really coming into their own. I think a lot of people just didn't have expectations for them. And I don't know. I like the pick. And now we're back over at my good friend, Mr. Mel Kiper Jr. here. He has Kenyon Sadiq going to the Kansas City Chiefs. I can't stand this pick. I think this is just not a good pick whatsoever. And while I understand what Kenyon Sadiq can bring, even if you have Travis Kelce, I still think it's redundant. You have Rashee Rice, who, granted, has off-the-field concerns that are going on, but the recent thing with the girlfriend was cleared by the NFL literally today. Adam Schefter made a breaking news statement about that. And he's not injured, so Rashee Rice is going to be their designated slot guy, which means that Kenyon Sadiq is going to be your number 2 tight end. He's going to be in 12 personnel sets, most likely as an inline guy. And as a tight end, he just doesn't have the chops as a blocker as other players that are there. So for me, I think that this fit just doesn't make sense, especially considering the fact that there's some premier cornerbacks that are available right now, and the Chiefs lost, I believe it was 3 cornerbacks in free agency this past year. If Mansour Delane is there, I think they should be sprinting that pick in, not deepening their depth at a single position that Sadiq would be very redundant at skill-wise. He is an unbelievable talent. He's super athletic. I just don't like the fit here, and I think there's more premier talent at more key positions that they should better prioritize at the 9 pick here. And then look at this. Cincinnati, they're going and swiping him up. Mansour Delane going to the Cincinnati Bengals. It makes sense. I think they're definitely trying to make that defense better. And in that division, there's certainly a lot of premier wide receiver talent that they have to deal with and they have to address. So it certainly makes sense. I think, once again, Ruben Bain continues to fall, which I think is crazy. I think that they would probably heavily consider going and getting Ruben Bain at the 10 spot here if he's available, especially considering edge is a premier position. But I think it comes down to best player available, and if they think Delane is the better player, then they're doing it. And then Miami, right here, Carnell Tate, wide receiver out of Ohio State. I like this pick. I think it makes a lot of sense. You just signed Malik Willis in free agency. You just hired a new coach, and you just traded away Jalen Waddle, and you released Tyreek Hill. You need wide receivers. And I think Carnell Tate does a lot for that team. And he's more of that jump ball contested catch guy that Miami's had a lot of past success with. I remember back in like the Devontae Parker days with Miami, that was something that I think the fans really enjoyed seeing, and something that this offense is just fundamentally missed in the Mike McDonald era. So for that reason, I like this pick. I actually prefer him over Mekhi Lemon. So the fact that they get him at 11 here, I think is a great value. Which brings us to number 12. I think this is a no-brainer if he's on the board for the Cowboys. If Ruben Bain falls to 12 to the Cowboys right here, they're going to do everything in their power to sprint this draft pick in. I also think that this situation right here is probably a potential trade-up situation with how much Miami's been selling, and with the fact that Ruben Bain is falling. I could see a world where Miami continues to sell and sells to a team like the Cowboys, who are just trying to go up a spot to secure a guy like Ruben Bain, who's really falling in this draft. And I'm willing to bet there's probably a lot of bidders just below Dallas here that would probably be in the market for him as well. But this is an amazing pick. It makes a lot of sense. They need an edge rusher. They made a terrible trade in dishing out Micah Parsons, but this really helps bolster that front seven. Makes a lot of sense. I would also think about cornerback here, but I think in terms of how the board fell, Ruben Bain makes sense. So I don't knock it. So Kiper, he has Jordan Tyson, wide receiver out of Arizona State, going to the Los Angeles Rams here with the 13th pick. I don't hate it. I think it makes sense. I think the skill set is a much better fit with the Rams than Mekhi Lemon. A lot of people, just with how the board falls typically, I think what you normally see is Carnell Tate will go to the Browns at 6, and then Jordan Tyson will go to Miami at 11, which most people then will say, okay, the Rams will take Mekhi Lemon at 13. But I don't like that fit whatsoever. Jordan Tyson is a lot more of a boundary guy. He's a lot more of an outside separator and can slot into that Rams offense a lot better, while still allowing Terrence Ferguson, someone who the Rams invested a very high second-round pick into, to slot into being kind of that big slot receiver, that inline second tight end in 12 personnel. And I think he would be a much better blocker in the run game than Mekhi Lemon potentially would be in the slot. So for that reason, I'll give Kiper his kudos here. Jordan Tyson makes a lot of sense here, but at the same time, with an aging quarterback with a lingering spinal thing that could take him out at any point, I could also see them going offensive line, which would also help their long-term projection when they start looking about who's going to be the next guy after Stafford, right? And we're going to want to have young developmental guys that can be good offensive line protection for whoever that next quarterback's going to be. Baltimore going Jermod McCoy, cornerback out of Tennessee. Let's go Vols. I like the pick. I think this makes a lot of sense. I had Jermod McCoy going to the Cowboys at 12 in my own mock draft. So to see him fall to 14 here, I think would be a great fit. You get to operate Marlon Humphrey still out of the nickel in the slot, which he did a lot of this past year and did a good job with. You've got Nate Wiggins as your CB1 boundary guy. And now Jermod McCoy doesn't have to deal with the pressure of being your designated CB1, doesn't have to deal with being the nickel guy, and can be that designated CB2. And I think that makes a lot of sense for him, and I think that would be a really good fit into that defense. I also could see a world where Kenyon Sadiq goes right here if he falls to 14 for kind of the similar reasons. You can move Zay Flowers out to a boundary role. You can have Kenyon Sadiq really help out in that run game as a big slot for Derrick Henry. But then also he can line up in line with Mark Andrews, and you can build a lot of really awesome things off of that. But I think this makes a lot of sense. I do like the Jermod McCoy pick here, and I think it fits that defense and what they want to do really well. And to have that amount of defensive back help in that defense, I think they could be really scary against passing offenses. Because you'll have Jermod McCoy, Nate Wiggins, Marlon Humphrey, Kyle Hamilton. That's really interesting right there. But I do think that they need to look at linebackers as well. So a guy like C.J. Allen, I think, is another guy that's worthwhile. 15 right here, Tampa Bay. I think they could also potentially be a trade down spot. I think their biggest glaring need, in my opinion, is linebacker. I look at C.J. Allen, linebacker out of Georgia. I think he's a guy that makes a lot of sense, especially given the fact Levante David retired. But edge is a premier position. You can never have enough edge rushers. Akeem Mesidor, I think, did an amazing job, and I think deserves a lot more credit than he does over at Miami. But he was great, and I think Tampa Bay would be very happy to make this pick. And I think Tampa Bay has also shown that they're going to take whoever they think is the best player on the board. You saw it last year when they took Emeka Egbuka, when they already had Mike Evans, who was healthy at the time, Chris Godwin, who was coming back from something at the time right there. And a lot of people viewed that first-round pick as highly questionable given that they had a lot of other needs. So for the Bucs, I think they go best player available, and if they think that it's Akeem Mesidor edge out of Miami, then pull the trigger. And with a team that's win now, getting an older guy like Mesidor, who is probably going to be a little bit more pro-ready right now and less of a developmental guy, it makes sense. 16, the Jets going Omar Cooper Jr., wide receiver out of Indiana. This is probably the higher mocks I've seen for Omar Cooper Jr. Usually I see him going around the 20s somewhere. So to see him go 16 at the Jets, that would have to mean that the Jets have really liked what they saw from him. But I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of this, to be completely honest. It makes sense because then you're coming out of it with what you would see as an edge rusher and, the best wide receiver available. I think there's other positions of value that you could potentially look at here. But if you're high on Omar Cooper Jr., then sure, go and get your guy. And we can move on to my Detroit Lions. They go in Monroe Freeling, offensive tackle out of Georgia. I think this is great value getting Monroe Freeling. I just think he's more of an outside guy. And I know they had injuries and having depth is valuable. But I think that they would benefit from more of an interior guy or a guy that has more interior and outside flexibility. So for that reason, I think there's the guard out of Penn State, who I mocked personally over here. Caden Proctor, if you want to take a swing on him, I think he's going to translate more to an inside guy. But with his experience as a tackle, potential of injuries, you can move him kind of all over the offensive line. I think that skill set gives a lot of value. However, I do agree that Monroe Freeling has the physical tools that you look for in an offensive lineman, especially an outside guy. But I think that there's other offensive linemen that they should look at before Monroe Freeling, to be completely honest. But if they think he's the best, then go and get whoever you think is the best player available. I did the same thing here. I agree with Miller on this one. I think Dylan Thieneman slots into what the Minnesota Vikings are looking to do really well. And I think the value at this position makes a lot of sense. I think this is a no-brainer, a great fit for them, and I don't think anybody would be knocking this whatsoever. I agree. 19, I made a similar decision here. I think that Carolina would have wanted to get Kenyon Sadiq if he's still available at 19, but given the fact that he's not available and the premier wide receivers are still not there either, even Omar Cooper Jr. went, I think this is an opportunity to get more protection for Bryce Young, who is smaller and getting closer and closer to his end of his contract. So let's get him some protection and let's really be competitive in this division and see what happens. So getting a guy like Fano who can play outside as a tackle, inside as a guard, you can kind of move him all over the place, I think makes a lot of sense. I like this pick. So then we're at Yates. He has Zion Young. This is probably the first draft I've seen him go get mocked in the first round. This is interesting. Edge out of Missouri going to the Dallas Cowboys right after they drafted Reuben Bain. So they're getting 2 edge rushers here. I don't know if I fully like this pick. I think for them, while Frank Clark was serviceable and did a good job for the Cowboys, someone they acquired from Green Bay in the Micah Parsons deal, I could also see where they go with like a Peter Woods. Let's get another interior guy, right? So then we're really bolstering that entire front seven, not just a single position. And I think you saw Sam Williams last year, I think really came into his own. You could also look at linebacker for them. CJ Allen is another playmaking linebacker. I know it's an unsexy position, but it's a position of need. You could also look at defensive back here. I know that Jermod McCoy and I know that Monroe Freeling already went, but what about maybe like a Colton Hood, cornerback out of Tennessee? Let's go Vols. I think there's, Avion Terrell, cornerback out of Clemson. That could be another option right here. So while I get edge is important, I think that based off the way that the draft board has fallen here, this is kind of a weird pick to me. I would say go defensive back or go interior D-line and really build out more of that team than just one position. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this name, but at 21, Kiper has the Pittsburgh Steelers going with the guard out of Penn State. Interior guy, I see the logic. I think it makes sense. I think this is a much better mock than saying like, oh, Ty Simpson at 21 to the Steelers. I think that they could certainly end up pulling the trigger and going with an offensive lineman here. I could certainly see them make a move on the defense and go and get another defensive back to play with Joey Porter Jr. over there. I think they're getting older in their secondary, so going and getting more guys that can be playmakers there, especially in that division that has like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, and the Browns who took Mekhi Lemon in this mock draft. There's a lot of wide receiver talent in that division, so you need playmakers on the outside who can defend them. So I could certainly see that move, but I don't hate this pick. I think it's good value at 21, so we'll give props to Kiper on that one. 21, Keldrick Falk, edge out of Auburn to the Chargers. It's good value. He fell to them at 22, and I get it, but dude, they were probably the most injury-prone offensive line in the NFL last year, and they probably had some of the worst backup offensive line play in the NFL last year. So for them, I think this has to be a no-brainer. Go and get whoever the best offensive line talent is, regardless of position. And for them, for the same reason that I said for the Lions, I think this is a great opportunity to go and get Caden Proctor. He's listed as a tackle right now out of Alabama, but I think he has inside skill set. He can play more in a guard role, left side, right side. But given his experience as a tackle, you can move him all over in the event of injury. And in that team that'll have Rashawn Slater coming back, Joe Alt coming back, Mekhi Becton who can slide into a guard role, getting yet another guy with inside-outside flexibility would really, really build out that offensive line, and I think make it more of a strength than a liability like what it was last year. 23, the Eagles has them going offensive line out of Arizona State. It certainly makes sense given that Lane Johnson's been battling injury. I don't knock the pick. I just think, once again, that there's more position of need for them. I would honestly say that cornerback 2 is a much bigger liability for that team than another offensive lineman. I think what we saw with the Eagles last year was Quinyon Mitchell was great on that boundary role as the CB1. Cooper DeJean was great in that nickel and slot role. And then that cornerback 2 was a liability, and they were getting exposed over there. And I think that's where we saw the age of Darius Slay start to show up. So for me to see cornerbacks really starting to fall a little bit, Avion Terrell, who's still on the board, I think that would be a much better pick for them at this spot than getting another offensive tackle who's kind of a reach at 23 right here. 24, Cleveland Browns. They have them going Caden Proctor. I have them going offensive line too, and the fact that they get Caden Proctor at 24 here, I think is a good fit. I wouldn't say it's value or a reach, but I think this is about where he should be falling. And for the Browns to come out of this with a wide receiver and an offensive lineman is exactly what that offense needs. It's just infusing it with more talent. So I like this pick, and I think it makes sense. Chicago Bears, getting out of this with Peter Woods, an interior defensive tackle out of Clemson, I think is an amazing pick. And I think he fits in exactly what they're trying to do over there in Chicago. As a Lions fan, I hate this because I think it makes a lot of sense and makes it tougher for us, especially when our interior O-line is just very shaky right now. But for the Bears, this is a great pick, and this is great value right here. For him to fall to 25 like this is a steal. 26, Buffalo Bills going with a defensive back. It certainly makes sense. I have them. I think I had actually Akeem Mesidor because of his age falling to the Bills at 26 here. But if Avion Terrell is there, they just grabbed Maxwell Hairston, the corner out of Kentucky last year, getting Avion Terrell, another young cornerback with a lot of potential. I think it makes sense, and I think you got to continue to build up that defense even more, so that way it's less pressure on Josh Allen to play hero ball to get them through games. And I'm glad that this isn't just another mocked wide receiver, because I think a lot of people just throw a wide receiver here, but with them already acquiring DJ Moore, they have Khalil Shakir, who's been great out of the slot. I don't think that getting another wide receiver is the biggest need for them in the first round at least. But getting another corner, a young corner with potential with a fifth-year option, it's a great pick. San Francisco going receiver, however, I think this makes a lot of sense. An outside perspective that I put into this one, though, is I was like, low-key, I think this could be where Eli Stowers ends up sneaking into the first round. He had an unbelievable scouting combine. Say what you will about the drills at the scouting combine, but at the end of the day, it does influence draft position, and it does influence where players fall. And Eli Stowers was arguably one of the most athletic tight ends in scouting combine history. With George Kittle, who's on the wrong side of 30, and with a severe injury that came late in the year, he's definitely going to be missing time. And in an offensive scheme that runs a lot of 2 tight end sets and 12 personnel, I don't think that Jake Tonjes, who I know they just re-signed, is really the full-time guy there. I think he can be a good second inline tight end. He can be a great blocker. He can add a little bit in the receiving game, but he's not nearly the same type of athlete that Eli Stowers is. So for me, I think wide receiver makes sense. Casey Concepcion, I don't hate the pick, but I think there's some interesting thoughts that you can think about outside of just wide receiver that can still get you weapons for Brock Purdy that can play all over the offense in a variety of different roles. And Eli Stowers, you can line him up as a big slot, as a receiver. You can put him in line as a tight end 2, as a blocker. You can, have him as your tight end 1 and have him running routes like that. There's just, as an offensive play caller, as someone who draws up schemes, I think Kyle Shanahan would prefer to have more of a chess piece than a guy who just predominantly operates out of the slot and had a history of drops. Houston Texans going Caden McDonald, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. I'm not mad at the pick. I just think that their defense was already unbelievably good at getting after the quarterback, generating pressure. I think this is probably a run-stopping move to be better at stopping rushing on that defense. But they traded away a lot of key starters on the offensive line. And I think their strategy right now, at least from what I'm gathering, is they just want to get younger on the offensive line. So for me, I think this is probably where they go and get some offensive linemen that they believe in. Another guy that I'm looking at is, I think he's out of Texas A&M. It's Chase Basantis, the offensive guard. I think he makes a lot of sense at this spot at 28 for the Texans. Get an interior guy who can kind of move around a little bit. But Caden McDonald's a good player out of Ohio State, and I think he'd make a lot of teams pretty happy. I just think there's other needs. Kansas City at 29 here. Kiper has a cornerback going to them. Yeah, I think that they should be drafting a corner. I just don't like how you waited all the way till 29 to take a corner. I think if you have Mansour Delane or Jamad McCoy and you get to take your pick at 9 as the Chiefs, I would rather take the pick there. And then even if you want to get a tight end with flexibility to play inside-outside, based off how the draft fell here, you could still walk away with Eli Stowers, but also have one of the premier cornerbacks in this draft. So it's no knock on Brandon Cisse. I think he's a good player, but I think if they need cornerback, they should just go get the best corner in the draft, because at 9 they're going to be able to do that. What I would rather do, and I'm spoiling all the stuff that I did in my mock draft here, is let's go Mansour Delane at the 9 spot. And then let's get one of those flexible hybrid safety chess pieces. Let's get Emmanuel McNeil-Warren out of Toledo, play him in that hybrid Nick Emmanwori, Kyle Hamilton type of role, as a guy who can help out in the run game, a guy who can help out matching up against tight ends in 12 personnel and heavy sets, a guy who can do a lot in pass coverage, just an athlete who can make plays. And I think that holistically makes your defense way better. And I think there's other opportunities to get weapons and receiving threats later on in this draft if they want to go and do that. And 30 right here, Miami. They're thinking what I'm thinking here. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, safety out of Toledo. If he's there, he's a great piece. Very versatile. You can move him around. You can do a lot of different things with him. And I think a guy like Jeff Hafley is really going to maximize that skill set in Miami. So I like this pick, and I think that they should have done it a pick earlier at 29 with the Chiefs if he's there. 29, Cassius Howell, edge out of Texas A&M, going to the Patriots. I do think that what we saw in their postseason run is they did struggle getting after the quarterback, and having an edge rusher that can do that makes a lot of sense. I could also see them taking a swing on a wide receiver if there's an opportunity there. But based off how this mock draft has gone, where Casey Concepcion has gone, where Omar Cooper Jr. has already gone, I think the only other guy that you're really looking at in the first round here would be probably like a Denzel Boston out of Washington. So I think it comes down to, is he a guy that you're that big on, or would you rather take another position of need and address wide receiver somewhere else? So I don't knock this too bad. I think it makes a lot of sense. Edge is a premier position, and you need guys who can get after the quarterback. So going with a guy like Cassius Howell, who slots in at 31 here pretty well, I like. And lastly, 32, R. Mason Thomas, edge out of Oklahoma, going to Seattle. I think Seattle's in a great spot here where they're not really drafting for any specific position of need. They're just going with whoever they think is best player available, and to them, if that's R. Mason Thomas, it makes a lot of sense. But I think that they can not really be wrong with anything that they pick here. So curious to see how the draft shapes out. I'm excited for this to happen on the 23rd, on Thursday, April 23rd. Let me know what you think about these mock drafts. Where did they get it right? Where did they get it wrong? And if you want to check out my own mock draft, I'll link it right here at the end of the video. So go ahead, give it a click, and let me know what I got wrong. But thank you guys for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.